Hey there, everyone, and thank you for listening to BACKTALK by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the podcast talk show for parents. I'm Janice Robinson Celeste, your host and publisher of Successful Black Parenting Magazine. Now, we're broadcasting live on location from the city of ATL. No, you can't tell by this wonderful room I'm in, but I will be in Atlanta all week long and then back in Los Angeles at the end of the week. So, guys, I hope you see me around. If you do, say hello. Don't be shy. Tell me that you listen to the podcast and be like, hey, I know you. I saw you. Or I heard of you. Or I seen you in the magazine. Come by and say hello. And know that our hashtag for the show is BACKTALK. So make sure you use that hashtag if you're listening right now. Share this out with your friends, this link, so that people can hear it and listen to it and see it if you're on Facebook. And you can comment. This is the best part. If you do join us live, you can always comment in the comment section, and I will post the best comments live on air. So it's pretty cool. So make sure if you're listening, you can join and do that. Now, today we're talking to Annie Rainking. For those audience members who can't see the video, this is why we have her on, because I think her perspective will be so interesting, because she is a white woman who is raising a Black son. And, you know, we have a lot of parents who are interracial or are raising biracial children, transracial, whatever term you want to use for your family. We have a lot of parents that actually buy the magazine for various reasons so that they can have a resource for their children who are Black. So, hi, Annie, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you tonight?
I am fantastic. So I want to know your story, because it's got to be good. So first of all, tell us about your son, your beautiful son, Ahmad, right? Is it
Ahmad, yeah.
Ahmad, okay. And is he your biological son or from relationship or adoption? What is your story?
Yep. So my son is now 10, Ahmad. He is beautiful, and he is my biological son. So I had him in a relationship and ended up being my first marriage. So when I was in my early 20s, I got pregnant. I had the mentality that if you're pregnant, you have to be married. And so I decided to marry somewhat of a one-night stand that ended up with my son. And we got divorced about a year and a half later. We realized that we were not compatible. He is still a musician. He grew up on the west side of Chicago. We just have very different backgrounds. And so he is my biological son. But what I think is interesting about this story is that my current husband, who is white, adopted him. So he's essentially half adopted. So I have the stretch marks to prove that he is my son. But my current husband did adopt him, and he has now been adopted for about 5 years. So while my son has dark skin and is viewed as a Black male in the world, he is being raised by essentially a white family. And so that there comes a lot of learning that happens with us out in the community through different situations. And so he now has 2 stepsisters that are part of our family. And so he, in our family, is the only person of brown skin. And so that, I think, gives him a unique identity, not much unlike identities that may be for transracial adoption adoptees either.
Okay. So let me ask you about views on race before having a Black child or relationship with a Black man. What were your views, and especially your extended family? Because I know from personal experience that even though the person you're dating, might be receptive and open and doesn't really care about race, the extended family can be somewhat racist, just plain out racist. And that's how they grew up. So was that your experience? And then how did you handle that when they found out you were pregnant by this man?
Right. So I have traditionally growing up, I had always dated Black or brown skinned men. So that wasn't something, I mean, yes, my grandparents definitely had a different view. They never used the N-word, but they did not call them politically correct words in their presence, thinking that they were being up and coming, but they just didn't use the correct terms to speak about my significant others. When I did become pregnant with my son, only one of my grandparents were still alive. And she didn't really have the race. It was more of my father's side that kind of had the racist type of conversations. And so my grandparents that met my son didn't really have any of those comments. But I think what is interesting is that having my son has made us as a family have more conversations. So the high school that my son will eventually go to, my mom went to, and she was there when they desegregated. So she was there when the first Black student was bused into that high school. And 60 years later, or however long, my son will be attending that same high school. And so I think it's just interesting to see the history of that. There's also lots of anecdotes that my parents have shared where I have learned through my own process of kind of experiencing my son in society, that they have had to stand up for my son in different groups of people who are their friends or their acquaintances, not knowing that their identity is an identity of a grandparent of a Black boy in America. And so I think that it has made all of my family members become more aware and become more knowledgeable so that they can stand up for him, making sure that we are advocating that that we don't have the negative racism within his life or within our lives.
No, I'm glad to hear they're standing up for him, because I've seen people just fall silent, and they will listen and not speak up. So to speak up is so important, to let people know that no, you're not. I'm not comfortable with this, and no, I'm not in your little club of racists. No, that's not me. So I think that is really important, especially for your child. So let me ask you, so you talk about the schools and your grandmother and it being desegregated, and now it's coming full circle because your child is going there. How is it, a lot of schools say, they're supposed to be desegregated, but they're really not. And then you find out that you're like the only Black kid in the classroom. So is it pretty much desegregated? Like, is it, you see a lot of brown faces? That's good. I was wondering if he would be like the only brown child. Have you ever had that experience where he was the only brown child and in a situation where he, was made aware of his skin color, or has it always been pretty smooth?
It hasn't always been smooth. So currently we live in a city. We chose to live in this city because we didn't want him to be the only brown-skinned face in a classroom. And so actually in the community that we live in the schools that he attends, in most of the classrooms, white students are in the minority, which was really something that my husband and I really strived for. We did not want him to be the person who was always looked to when a conversation came up about Black people or African Americans, or we didn't want that to be his life story. But we did have those experiences when we were trying to find preschools. And so some of the preschools we initially started at, he was the only brown-skinned child, boy or girl. And we had to do some reevaluation. Some of them we left because we didn't feel comfortable. We didn't feel like he was given the same chance. And that there were preconceived notions and prejudices that came along with that, not only from the teachers, but also from the parents. So not only seeing his skin, but then also hearing his name. I know that a lot of times when people will hear his name, Ahmad, that they will have preconceived notions of what that means, what he looks like, what type of personality he may have. And so we definitely had to fight against that. And we made some decisions to move him at some points also.
So this made me think of a lot of different things. So you're absolutely right. And before you had a child like this, or, it seems like you're pretty liberal with things, but people tend to think that these encounters are made up, where people have preconceived notions and biases or just racist, and that, Black and brown people are making up these scenarios. They're not true. They're not being discriminated against. And obviously you found it also to be true. Absolutely. So especially in schools, and I used to be a teacher, so I know it's a problem in almost every school in America where you have a majority of white teachers, and white women teachers seem to be the ones that are doing it the most. And they don't even realize it sometimes. And then if you point it out to them, of course, they'll vehemently deny it. But it's a learning process, I think, and you have to be willing to learn. So I've seen that happen. And now I think after you experience it so much, you get kind of this, I call it racist radar. Yes. Where you just, my map is still on my phone, hold on. Where you kind of can feel that negative energy. It's just, and I try to explain it to people, my friends who are not African American, Black, or Latino, or any of the minority races, that it feels this almost like, when you run into someone and they don't like you and you don't know why they don't like you at work, but they don't like you. And it's that same energy. So, I mean, have you found that to be true? Whether you went to Little League or whatever, you can just walk up to someone and you can tell their energy changes when they see you have a Black son, or find out that you have a Black son.
Absolutely. I have had that many, many times from the time he was born, not only myself, but since I was quite young when I had my son. My parents have really helped me raise him until I kind of got remarried. And so my parents have had that experience also. Both of my parents are ministers in predominantly white churches. And so having my son in those churches, as soon as they found out that they had a Black grandson, some of, especially the older white women, had a problem with that and made it very apparent that they did not want their minister in this well-to-do white church to have a Black grandson, and you shouldn't be showing him off.
Wow.
Right. And then in my experiences, what I've noticed is if my son is interacting on a playground or certain types of things, that some parents will approach him the way that they might approach other Black and brown boys, thinking that they are going to be more rough, thinking that they're just those preconceived notions that come along with how we have been raised in society. But as soon as my son calls me mom, you can see the change in the parent. You can see that they're like, oh, wait, he's not who I thought he was. And they completely change their interaction with him. They completely kind of change how they do that. And then additionally, the other kind of caveat of that is that I have because my only biological child has brown skin, I have a really hard time relating to other white parents because they just don't understand. They don't, I know I fully don't understand, but the little bit that I do through the experiences that I've had, they just don't understand that he can't go out in our front yard with a toy gun the same way that his little white friend can go out in our front yard with a toy gun. He can't, he needs to know kind of what to do if he gets pulled over, that in a different type of way that I would, as a young child, need to know what to do if I get pulled over. So there are some things that, even though my skin puts me in the group of other white parents, I cannot relate because they just cannot see it from my point of view because they haven't had those experiences. And so I think that's kind of a difficult area also.
Now, you said he's 10 years old now?
Yep.
And so in those 10 years, you had to go through some shocking moments, like something that really rattled you. Can you tell us a story that maybe you grew from, or that happened to you or your son that would never happen if he was a little white boy?
Right. So one of the things that comes up most is when we travel. So I really, really enjoy traveling, and my husband doesn't. So many times it's me and my son who travel together. And so before he was adopted, so his last name is hyphenated. So he has his biological father's last name along with my husband's last name to keep that kind of ancestry. And before he was adopted, we had different last names. And the questioning, the being pulled out of line, the are you really related? Can he really be traveling with you? Those types of things would have never happened if I was traveling with one of my stepdaughters who is biologically not mine, but is white. Our skin color is the same. And that still happens even today when we travel, that the questions and the comments and the, I feel bad, but I kind of have to coach my son. I say, okay, they're going to ask you your name. You have to say your name. They're going to want you to talk because they don't want you to they don't want to think that I'm stealing you. Like you have to indicate that you are supposed to be with me. And that's a lot to put on the shoulders of a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old who, if he was white, he wouldn't have to do that. He could be the shy, cute little boy who's the parent answered for him. But when they see two different colors, those radars shoot off for a lot of the workers in the airport.
Right, and they're worried about that human trafficking, which is a huge problem, and I understand that. But you're absolutely right. If they wouldn't even question it twice if his skin matched yours, and I understand that. That has to be annoying because you have enough to hold up your travel time, and then you have to deal with that and. So I understand. So the siblings who are his stepsisters, how do they handle this race issue, and what have they been through?
So it's a lot of conversations. So they have been siblings essentially in the same house since the girls were 18 months and Ahmad was 3. So they have really grown up together. But it's interesting as they get older, and the school district that they go to is not the same school district that Ahmad goes to, and theirs is more white. I mean, it's not diverse. But they are starting to get some more diversity within their schools. And it's interesting when they come home and they talk about new friends, and they'll compare the new friend to Ahmad. So like, oh, we have a new friend today, Tommy, and we'll say like, oh, how's Tommy? Like, tell us. And the first thing that will come out is, oh, well, he has brown skin like Ahmad. And so they have started to kind of have those comparisons, but it's just kind of the conversations about we don't describe people by, like their skin color. We don't describe people by their weight. We don't we talk about how nice they are, like those kind of characteristics. But thankfully, their mom and their stepdad are pretty open-minded and we haven't had any of the conflict that possibly could happen if their mom had more racist tendencies and maybe brought that into our home, which is very, very, I'm very thankful for that. There is that openness on both sides.
And they go to a different school because they mostly stay with their mother, correct?
Correct.
People are going to want to know that. Okay. So, and what you mentioned culture a little bit, like how do you incorporate Black culture into his life? Because it's important because he's half of each, right? So to stay grounded in that culture, because one of the things I totally believe is that, and this is going to lead into, because you have a book, which I'm going to get into,
right.
But we are more like the different is what I found in traveling the world. We all have very similar marriage ceremonies. We have very similar wants and desires for our children. But the culture is key, and everyone that experiences culture should basically not poo-poo it. They should be like, oh, this is something that should be celebrated. Just as we celebrate the Irish culture on St. Patrick's Day, we all should celebrate it just as hard, whether we're Irish or not, whether we're Black or not. I think it's something that we should cheer on and encourage. Right. But when you're raising a Black child, because of what's out here in the world, and especially this political climate, what also makes them strong is to know that side of them has a very strong and powerful history, so that when they are challenged about that side of who they are, they have a lot of comebacks where they know they can basically almost educate that person, whether they want to be educated or not, because they have learned all about their culture. Now, how have you incorporated culture into his life?
So that's been the hardest thing. I'm going to be honest with that. That's been the hardest thing for us to navigate, because while his school district is very diverse, the friends that we have within our lives are not very diverse, not because we have tried to do it that way, but just because that has been something that has come about. The way that we have tried to incorporate kind of Black culture into his life is making sure that he goes to a Black barbershop. So he goes to a Black barbershop a couple times a month, and that really, he's been highly educated in a Black barbershop, going with my father to kind of understand the dynamics of the community that's within that type of environment. We do we do sometimes attend some Black churches around the community, and there are like celebrations within our community. So they have like a gospel fest and a jazz fest and those types of things. But I will say that consciously within the last couple of years, my husband and I have really talked about, like, Ahmad is getting older. We really have to make a conscious decision of how we are going to bring in that Black culture. So in my real world, I'm a professor, and I have a student who is a Black female, and she jokes with me all the time because she says, "Oh, Dr. Rankin, you are just not giving that baby anything he needs. He doesn't have any soul food in his life. Like, I need to come over and I need to cook some food, and he needs to have that idea of soul food and what that means, and he needs to have some good cooking," because she knows I don't cook. And so I think that being open and honest with people in our lives and saying, like, we're seeking this out, help us, because we don't have knowledge on that. That's not something that we didn't go to, like, white celebrations growing up. That's not something that has been part of our lives. And so how are we going to seek that out? So that's definitely something that we consciously are aiming for.
Right. Well, we want to make sure that, as much as possible, like you explain, like, white celebrations, there's really no such thing. There's like Italian, Irish,
right.
But no white type
right.
of celebration.
No, right.
I just want to make sure we clarify that on there.
Clarify.
And then, I highly suggest, like, one of the things that we do, and I did with my children, is that we took field trips, whether they were staycations or we went somewhere on vacation. We made sure we visited every African American museum possible and supported them as well, even down to the Black firehouses and things like that they have. So I'm going to do a book called Black America, Where to Visit with Your Kids very soon. Don't anybody steal my idea. Okay. But yeah, because it's so important. The Smithsonian right now has the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. That is a great place to visit. I mean, you can hit several different spots at one time in D.C. But when you go on vacation, and one of the things I personally want to do is to follow the Underground Railroad routes, and they have different tours for that, if you can do that. Other than that, like staycations and even just learning about Black history that's not taught in school, because they teach you the same things over and over again. And that is, of course, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. They don't even teach Malcolm X, so right. That's like radical. Oh my God. So those kinds of things are really important. Talk about why Kaepernick is taking a knee and what's the real reason, and then go to the other side, because it's important to teach them what the opposition is saying and say it's not about a flag. No matter how much they say it just won't make it true. So it's not about the flag. It's about Blacks being killed for no reason, and it's a big disparity about it. And then as he gets older, especially let him know that these are arguments on the other side, and this is why they are saying that. But this is the other proof to show that they're just misinformed or whatever the reason is. So it's just important to give them that fuel, so when the time comes, no one can bring them down. And I have this saying called "build them up before society breaks them down." And it's so important, because if you don't, society will break them down. And we have such a high suicide rate right now with our young children in his age group right now, up to age 11, 5 to 11. And then it skips teens a couple ages and goes to our teens, and especially our Black boys. So for them to survive this type of environment today, which people say, times don't really change, but they really do, because the internet has changed the world for our children. Whereas we would go home from school and we didn't have to worry about that bully anymore. That bully's now online on Facebook. No, I'm sorry, they're not on Facebook. Let me stop. They're on Snapchat.
Right.
They're on Instagram and all of those, and even Google documents. They will share documents with each other, and they will talk that way. So your child won't block that book. Not your child specifically, but your child won't, as an audience, won't necessarily block that bully because they know they'll get bullied more when they get back in school and by their friends and everyone else. So yes, it's different. But I want to get to your book because we're going overtime here.
Okay.
You have a book. Let me put it up on the screen for those who can see it. And it's called Not Just Black and White. And I love it because it looks like your son and you there on the cover. Is very, very important. Tell us a little bit about this book. What inspired it and the story behind it?
So the story behind it is essentially, it starts from my young childhood and kind of my trajectory with race. And so I lived in Kenya for a little bit. So my experience kind of being a minority, but not really being a minority in a African country, because I was still put on a pedestal. So going through that process was quite interesting. And then kind of the whole process of being a mother of what I call a socially perceived Black son. Because by society, he's perceived as a Black boy, but he has a lot of intricacies. So that's why it's called Not Just Black and White. His skin color doesn't define him. There's many other things, just like all of us have many things too that define us more than our skin color. So I talk about my experience with figuring out his skin, figuring out his hair, figuring out schooling, figuring out all of these things, and going through my own process of making really dumb mistakes and figuring out who are my advocates, who are the people that I can go ask questions to. And so this was inspired because I needed a book like this to kind of talk about what is race from a parent of a Black child who the parent is white, and there are not many out there. And so that was kind of inspired by this. What I think is interesting is since this book has come out, many different people have read it. And just within the last week, literally, I had 2 acquaintances read it and say, Annie, I thought this was just going to be for white people. I read it because we're friends, but I thought this was just going to be for white people. They are both African American. And they said, and I reflected so much. I didn't realize, I never thought about a white person's perspective. I never thought about you just wanting to be a fly on the wall just so you can get some knowledge about, you don't wash your hair. I don't wash his hair every day. That's one of the mistakes I made because I wash my hair every day. So why wouldn't I wash his hair every day? Knowing that I have to oil his skin. I just want to be a fly on the wall so I can get knowledge. Not that I need someone to give me all the knowledge, but I need to, just like any mother or any parent would ask, how do you potty train? How do you sleep through the night? How do you do this? There are questions I need to ask, but the people that I associated with didn't have those same experiences or could provide that information for me. So this is just kind of a book of discovery. It's very vulnerable. So at some points, I very much state the dumb mistakes I made, and hopefully have shown how I've learned from that. And some of the places I haven't learned yet. And it's just a really great a way to kind of think about race in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And a lot of our parents who do have biracial kids or adopted children that are Black and they're white as well would find your stories interesting, as well as some of the Black parents, like you said, who basically don't know that other side or perspective. It would be interesting to find out what you went through. And I know that the hair is a big deal because we have one woman who is actually going around, especially when it is their girls that are being adopted. Her name was Tamika Swint, and she is a stylist. Oh. And she is training white parents, how to do Black hair. And she's gone viral on YouTube showing what to do and what not to do. So right. YouTube is definitely a great resource. Now, where can we find this book?
So you can find it at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. It's sold at both places. And then the publisher is Front Edge Publishing. So it's also, if you want to go straight from the publisher, you can get it straight from the publisher there also.
Okay. Now, what words of wisdom? I don't know if they'll even accept it, but for those people who out there who are biased, racist, bigots, whatever they are, whatever you want to call them, to whatever degree, what wisdom would you give them about race? Because I think, even if they won't listen, it's just good to say.
Right. I think the most important thing is to understand that race is a social construct, and that racism in America is kind of unique to America. In other parts of the world, race is seen differently because it is not embedded in our genes. It's based on the color of our skin. So I was asked one time if I would write this book if my son passed. So basically, if his skin was lighter. A Black woman asked me that at one of my book talks, and I said, you know what? Probably not, because I wouldn't have the same experiences. Mm-hmm. Because race in America is such a social construct that you need to open your eyes to the structural racism, the institutional racism, the history of racism that is embedded in genes that actually has scientific backing to say that the trauma impacts for generations. And so, Raul, people who say that racism may be done in America, it's not. I can tell you from my experiences, you can tell probably from your experiences, but racism is not gone, but we really need to start having conversations about race and having that dialogue, because that's the only way we're going to move forward. And so that's kind of, just have conversations, be open, be accepting, listen, don't come in with a closed mind.
I think that's great advice. I always say that we're more than our skin color. We are a culture. And you're absolutely right. And the same thing with we have to start talking about race, and we have started talking about it. And I think that's why we're getting such pushback and all these political types of changes. But if you don't talk about it, to me, it's like an abusive relationship, because it is abuse. It's the epitome of bullying, racism, right? So an abusive relationship, you don't talk about it, does it go away? No, you can't sweep that under the rug and expect it to disappear. It's not. So it's an abusive relationship in the United States right now with this whole racial tension. And if we don't talk about it, it will never, ever go away. And I've heard a lot of people, Black too, say, well, why are you talking about it? Why are you bringing that? Because if we don't, it's not going to change. It's just not. So right. If you can give some last words of wisdom to our parents that are listening, there are going to be some that might be going through what you're going through, and there are others that probably can't even, they are probably like, duh, I'm Black. I deal with this every day. Right. My son's going through it. Yeah. So you just found out, whoopee, so right. What do you have to say to those people?
I would say, to be open to have conversations, but also for any type of parent, realize that everyone is experiencing race at their own at their own pace. White parents of white children are experiencing race also, because they are coming into a world where their children are having a diverse set of friends. And so they need to understand race also, because they need to understand why their friends may not be able to do the same things they do because of how society perceives them, and educate them. So yes, some people may already know this. It was a learning experience for me. But I think that being open to hearing different perspectives educates us all. All of us can learn something, and being open to having those conversations.
All right, that's awesome. Now tell our audience where they can find you online.
Yep. So you can find me on Twitter. It's at AKRanking, which is REINKING. And then I'm also on Facebook. It's at Dr. Ranking, which is DRREINKING.
All right, fantastic. So I'm going to close out the show. I want to thank you all for listening to BACKTALK by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the podcast talk show for parents. If you missed part of the show, no worries. You can just wait a few minutes and click the replay of the podcast, and make sure you share it with anyone who needs to hear it. And let's get the word out about BACKTALK. Now, our next episode is tomorrow, but a different time. On Saturdays, we broadcast at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I am going to be talking with Lindsay Davis. And she is the ABC News correspondent who wrote a children's book that she will read live on air. So you might want to have your kids with this one. This is very kid friendly. And on a side note, I just found out she will be hosting the Democratic debates in a few weeks. So you'll see her there. She'll be the only woman of color, which we would say, but she's Black, but woman of color and a Black woman to be there. And she will be hosting and moderating the debate. So make sure you tune into Back Talk tomorrow, and you can ask questions in the chat on Facebook. If questions get picked, as I will always tell you, I will post it live. And one more thing, don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We're on Twitter at Black Parenting One, and on Facebook under the same moniker. And Instagram, though, we are Black Parenting Magazine. So you can find us there at Black Parenting Magazine. And our website, because we want you guys to go there, because we want our advertisers to see that we have a nice listening audience on our website. So click through to those articles to successfulblackparenting.com. It's full of good content to help you to thrive and not just survive as a parent. That's our mission, to help you thrive and not just survive. So be sure to rate our podcast wherever you're listening to it. Until next time, we will talk soon. Ciao.